And I guess we'll go ahead and get started. And we are recording this, so we will have this up on our YouTube channel later for review. And I'll probably also ask that either Jeff or Ryan posts links to the plugins that I'm talking about in the chat so that you can go look at their sites as well and download them. So today's episode of Office Hours is all about plugins. And plugins are essentially ways that we can extend the FileMaker platform beyond the features that are included with just FileMaker Pro and FileMaker Server out of the box. Now, these plugins are different than things like APIs that you would integrate with, but you can use plugins to make working with APIs easier. So a lot of the plugins we'll cover today are favorites of mine that I've used in the past or what we've recommended. Some of the things that I use them for might not be what you need to use them for. So for example, like if you want to make sending email or pulling email out of an email inbox easier, you might use the 360works email plugin, but that's not on my list to cover today because it's a utility plugin that we use, and it's not flashy or cool to talk about. So let's go ahead and get started. So again, plugins are essentially like a packaged piece of code. FileMaker has an actual SDK, which is a software development toolkit that you can use. You can create your own plugins if you wanted to write them. It's written in Objective-C or C++, one of those two. So it's not really easy to write your own plugins, which is why there's not a million plugins for FileMaker. There's only, a few dozen currently maintained plugins. So almost pretty much all the plugins out there are from third-party providers, other FileMaker partners like Mainspring, or just people that they needed to build a plugin to resolve one thing. And plugins used to be a lot more prolific in the FileMaker community. About 10 or 15 years ago, plugins were the way to solve issues for things that FileMaker didn't do. But over the last 10 versions of FileMaker, especially since FileMaker 12 was upgraded, and especially since we've had things like insert from URL for dealing with APIs, a lot of the stuff that FileMaker can do has included stuff that previously was only available through plugins. So as an example of that, there is the Super Container plugin from 360works. And prior to version 12 of FileMaker, you couldn't store your container contents external to your database. So if you wanted to do that, you needed a plugin to do it. But then FileMaker 12 came out, the file format changed, they introduced external secure container storage, and now you can separate out your database and your container contents. So a lot of the features, or a lot of the popular features that we have in FileMaker today are a direct result or an indirect result of popular plugins out there. So the first thing you want to do, if you're considering using a plugin, make sure to do a little bit of research, make sure that it's still maintained, make sure that it shows compatibility with FileMaker 19, and that the developer is still in business, because there's still some plugins floating around that are supporting legacy applications all the way back to FileMaker 5 or something, and their plugins don't work on more modern versions of FileMaker. So pretty much the sky's the limit for what they can do, since it's written in a pretty low-level base code of that Objective-C or C++. Anything that you can code a program to do on your computer, you can turn then into a plugin. So I'm talking about things like if I wanted to connect to a scanner so that I could scan images directly into FileMaker, that can be done with a plugin. If I wanted to get a fingerprint scanner that I can use for handling logins with biometrics, that's something a plugin can do. Interfacing with physical devices through your USB port or a serial port, interfacing with your printers on your network. And then going outside of what FileMaker's sandbox is, with the ability to talk to like the file system, to be able to move files around, create folders, that type of stuff. That's all stuff that you could do with plugins. So one of the plugins we're going to talk about later, MBS, has something like 5,000 functions of the different things it can do, and that's because it's just been built up over the course of 2 decades to have functions to handle anything you can think of. So we'll talk about that in a later. So the advantages of plugins are obvious. It just extends FileMaker's reach beyond what you can do out of the box with FileMaker. Our way of thinking, a lot of developers think this way too, is we try to solve all those problems of how do we do this with using native FileMaker first, because native FileMaker without plugins is going to be the most compatible across all of your devices. It's probably going to be the most reliable as well. I'll talk about disadvantages here in a second, but if we get to a point where we say it's either not economically feasible for us to do things this way in native FileMaker, or if it's just so much easier, or if it's a problem that's only solved by a plugin, that's the obvious advantage of a plugin. It's designed to fill the need of something that FileMaker can't do on its own. And that in turn allows us to do a lot of things with FileMaker platform that you can't do with other systems. So like if I was using something like Microsoft Access and I wanted to do granular printer control to be able to specify, to be able to program into my system that, I need to send the envelope to this printer, then I need to send the document to this printer, and then I need to print out this contract in the third tray of this third printer using a specific paper size and orientation. That's all stuff I could do with like a FileMaker printer plugin, but it's not stuff you would be able to do in things like Access. So that gives FileMaker a leg up over other platforms because it is extensible beyond that. And that's something you're definitely not going to see with, web applications that are sandboxed inside of only whatever a browser can do. That's, it gives FileMaker this power because it's still an application that you install on your computer. So you can interface with your computer a lot better than things like web apps can do. But these do come with some disadvantages. It's not all rosy cheeks in the plugins world. The main disadvantage that you'll note is just compatibility. There are certain plugins that aren't compatible with certain varieties of FileMaker. For instance, there's some plugins that are only Mac only plugins. They'll only work on a Mac desktop. They will not work on a Mac server. They will not work on an iOS device. They will not work on a Windows computer. So a good example of that is a plugin called Bbox. So Bbox plugin, start with that. So this product is made by Beeswax, and it's very powerful for what it does. It allows you to execute scripts of other languages, JavaScript, Python, AppleScript, PHP, and Ruby, Bash and shell scripts, run FileMaker SQL queries from Python, this type of stuff. It allows you to do this, but you're limited to this only working on Mac OS. So it won't work on Windows computers. So if I need something that runs Python on a Windows computer, I'm out of luck with this plugin. So you might have to do some research. Maybe there's another plugin that can run it, and there actually is another plugin that can run it. I'll highlight it there. But that's a disadvantage. The second disadvantage is plugins for iOS are limited only to app SDK files. So FileMaker has an iOS SDK that you can use to basically compile your app as if you were going to release that as an app in the App Store. And that's a great feature on its own. It allows you to make apps that can go into the iOS App Store that you can sell or that you can distribute for free. There are plenty of apps in the App Store that are actually FileMaker apps that are gone through that route. But the disadvantage is I can't use plugins with FileMaker Go. There's no methodology for me to be able to install a plugin on FileMaker Go and use it. Installing is another thing. One of the main disadvantages of using plugins is that you might have to install it and configure it for all of your users. So in order to get that functionality, you need to have more hands-on of having to go and install that. And that's why I pulled up this documentation here so that you could see installing plugins. And I'll go ahead and pop this in the chat window here if Zoom decides to show me the bar. So there's our installing plugins. The easiest way to do it is to just go into FileMaker Pro, go to your preferences, go to your plugins tab, and reveal your plugin folder. And on Mac, you're going to see your plugin files are .fm plugin files. And on a PC, this is going to be kind of the same. It'll send you to a different folder. It'll still be called extensions, but your file format for a Windows plugin is .fmx64. And the 64 is important because FileMaker's been 64-bit only since I think version 18 or 19. One of the two, but going forward, only the .fmx64 plugin format will be used. The older one is .fmx. It's not .fmx32. It's just .fmx. So if you find a plugin and it's .fmx and you're wondering why you can't use it with FileMaker 19, it's because that hasn't been maintained for 64-bit. So yeah, normally it's just as easy as popping your plugin in here and restarting FileMaker. There are also configuration options in here. So I'm using a trial version of this now. So each plugin has its own kind of registration process that you have to go to. That makes it more difficult as well. So basically maintaining the plugins installed, making sure that every user that's using your system has the plugins installed, making sure that every version of the plugin is up to date. Keeping plugins up to date is a problem. You know, you might keep updating FileMaker. Users might update FileMaker on their own. Some users might have version 18 of FileMaker. Some might have version 19, and you might require different plugins for each one of those people. So it's a lot more to keep track of if you're going to introduce plugins in your environment. Now, there is an advantage of that FileMaker server also allows you to run plugins, but that can also come with some limited features. So that's how plugins are supported for things like FileMaker WebDirect, or when you're performing a server schedule. And yeah, all right, so that's some disadvantages. And then the last disadvantage would be the fact that pretty much every plugin that you're going to get is based on a third party. So support is another disadvantage. You're either counting on that plugin developer to provide you with support, which some Claris partners are better than others at providing support, but some Claris partners also charge for support. Like 360works will charge you for support of things like MirrorSync and their plugin support. So if you don't have the troubleshooting skills to work it out on your own, you might wind up getting kind of stuck with plugin that doesn't work, and that can cause issues. You can actually cause issues in FileMaker, and actually Monkey Bread plugin is notorious for this. When new versions of FileMaker come out, something in your database will break, and it won't be FileMaker's fault, it'll be the plugin's fault, because the plugin is loaded with FileMaker when you start up FileMaker. So if you ever have problems with your FileMaker files and you just updated FileMaker to a new version, first thing to try, just go into your preferences, go into plugins, uncheck all your plugins, restart FileMaker, and see if it fixes your problem. And then that way, that's an easy way to diagnose that it's a plugin problem that you're experiencing. Okay, so that's mostly the explanation. Do you have any questions coming out of that? Everybody kind of get what plugins are, the reasons for using them, the reasons for not using them. Feel free to share, in the chat window what you use plugins for. I'm going to show you one example of what we use plugins for. Actually, I'll show you that right off the bat because that's a pretty cool thing. So we actually have a vertical market product here at Mainspring. It's something that we sell off the shelf to people, and it's called FormPro. And basically what FormPro is it's a forms filler. So that means that I want to be able to enter my data in any one of my forms that I have. We have over 400 forms in our form library. So we have a ton of forms. And when you enter in data in one PDF, it gets sucked into this database and sent out to all the other PDFs. So if I fill in my first and last name on a form, it gets filled out on all 430 forms for first and last name. And at the core, at the center of this is a plugin called 360works Scribe. And what 360works Scribe is essentially a plugin that allows us to interface with PDF files, Excel files, and Word files, just specifically those three formats. And this is all it does, is it allows us to read data out of PDFs and write data to PDFs. And that's what that's essentially all that we use it for. So let me show you an example of this. I'm going to just go to a random customer here. And I'm going to pick one of these forms. I've got some forms loaded in here, and I'm going to choose edit data. So what this allows us to do, the previous old version of FileMaker that was originally built in FileMaker 2, the previous old version of FormPro had all of these form layouts as FileMaker layouts. There were hundreds of layouts. There were 35,000 fields in 10 tables, and it was just awful. So we actually replaced the data entry interface that we use in this app is PDFs. We don't have users entering in information into FileMaker at all anymore. So if I want to come in here and say that my policy effective data is effective from like 1/1/22 to like 12/31/2022, I'm using this to fill out information, and then I'm sending it back to FormPro, and that reverses the process. So what this window here is doing is it's actually going through the 269 fields in this PDF form. It's grabbing information out of the database and it's sending it back to my database. And on the back end here, how that works, I can give you a little under the hood, is I have a little file here in the back, and this is everything that I just entered. So if I do a find for 1/1/2022, here's that key that I just updated. So the plugin read the data out of the PDF for all 269 of those fields, and then ran through and updated my data in my database. And now I've got that data stored. So I'm able to use PDF, I'm an entirely separate program to do that. And what that allows us to do in FormPro's case is it allows us to be extensible. We now have 430 forms, and adding forms is as easy as us creating those PDF forms and just mapping those keys together. So right now, this is focused on the trucking insurance agencies and industries. But we're planning, there's no limitation. Any PDF form can be loaded into FormPro. So if you know of any other industries and you might be interested in this separately, let us know. But that's FormPro, and that is all based on the 360works Scribe plugin. So how does that actually, how do we actually use plugins? That's something where you're like, okay, well, okay, you've been talking about plugins for 20 minutes now, but how do I do that? So let me show you. So we'll go to office hours today, and we're going to do a base elements demo. This is the next plugin that I'm going to talk about, base elements. And base elements is really cool because it is open source. So let me actually I'm going to put the link to Scribe. Good job, Jeff. Thank you. I'm actually going to use your link and open it. So the base elements plugin is an open source plugin. It's made by Goya Interactive, who are guys from around Australia and New Zealand. So this is something that's not supported, but like you can't get tech support from them, but it's a pretty well along plugin. So mostly all the bugs and everything have been worked out. So it's pretty easy to go through here. So let's do a sample dialog display. So let's create just a little basic button here. Show dialog. Let's create a little script called show dialog here. And you notice I'm going to set a variable. And the reason I'm setting a variable is that most plugins are actually functions that are added on to FileMaker. And if you look at your little functions bar here in the calculation engine, you'll see external functions here. And external functions are your plugin functions. Now, some plugins also offer, and this is new as of, I think, version 17, you can have plugins create script steps as well. But the script steps really are just script step versions of these functions. So I've always just kept with using these functions. So here's my base elements functions in here. So I want to find that BE dialog display, and we see here this stuff in the curly braces is optional, so I'm going to do away with that. So I'm going to do a title here, and we're going to call this test title. This is a plugin function. And then for the default button, we're going to say OK. All right, so let's save all of that, go back to browse mode. And here we go. So this is very different than FileMaker's function, right? Because FileMaker's function for dialogues is show custom dialog. And I can do the same thing. I can do test title. This is not a plugin function. And just leave OK and delete the cancel button out of there. And now when I do this, I have this dialog. Well, for some things, this may be better. Like 95% of the time, I'm probably okay just using this dialog. But there's some certain cases where I might want a system dialog instead of a FileMaker dialog. And I think, I'm not entirely sure, but I think this might show HTML. I'm not sure exactly if it supports rich text, but let me try that really quick. No, it doesn't. All right. Well, there might still be reasons. Maybe you like the look of this dialog better than the one built into FileMaker, but that's an example. There's actually an entire plugin built off of dialogues. It's called Troy Dialog. And Troy Dialog is like the overkill version of base elements dialog functions. And that's what you'll find as well, is a lot of plugin functions overlap from plugin to plugin, because a lot of different developers have had the same issue that they've tried to work out. So like creating folders can be done with base elements, but it can also be done with Monkey Bread. And it can also be done with native FileMaker now, but only more recently. So Troy File, though, aside from the standard system dialog here, it also lets you do these types of dialogues where you have like an EULA agreement or something. It lets you do system alerts, these style alerts. And some of these things might only be, Mac only. It also lets you do multiple forms dialogues. So this has kind of been replaced in FileMaker with card windows. But again, remember back to, it was only 5 years ago that we really didn't have card windows in FileMaker. So we didn't have the capability of doing something like this. So the evolution of FileMaker can be kind of traced back to these plugin functions. All right. So another thing you can do, you've got constants in here. You've got, oh man, clipboard. That's a good thing here. clipboard get, let's do clipboard get text. And format. So this, I'm going to copy this example here. So when you copy stuff from FileMaker, like if I want to copy and paste this button, what goes on my clipboard while I'm copying that button is kind of a semi-proprietary XML formatted set of instructions for copying that object, because this is an object, it's got styles attached to it, it's got a script attached to it, it's got instructions. So, so let me see if I can. I'm going to use that function to create a global variable here, and I'm just going to call that clipboard. And you know that it has this weird format here, and that's because there's a couple different clipboards. When you think about a clipboard, like usually the operating system, like Windows or Mac, manages it for you. So you have to tell it which part of that clipboard you can have, because like when you copy a password out of your keychain in Mac, it's not going to be the same clipboard as what FileMaker is using. So this function actually supports getting a whole bunch of those things. So I'm going to, again, I'm going to copy this dialog box. I'm going to run the script, and we're going to not see anything. Oh man, this one might be harder to demo. There was a question in there about dialogues and WebDirect. Those dialogues do not work in WebDirect. So when you think about scripts running in WebDirect, every script runs on the server side. Nothing runs on the client side in the browser. So if you had a dialogue show up, it would show up on the server side when that script was running. So the user would never see it. So the way you do dialogues in WebDirect now is in 19, they introduced card window support. So you do a card window dialog, or you do the regular FileMaker custom dialog, which is compatible with WebDirect. But plugin functions, they all execute like you were doing perform script on server. So if you think about perform script on server, that's what WebDirect scripts run as essentially. All right, so I didn't see us get our clipboard function here. Let's see. To convert the item on the current clipboard designated by the format passed to the function, text objects, other clipboard types. Turns a copied FileMaker script step into text XML representation. All right, so let's do this. I'm going to save this clipboard thing, and I'm going to do, let's just say that I'm going to very quickly do a test email, test message. Okay, so I'm going to copy this, and then I'm going to run it again. I forgot I would probably need to block that. All right, so now I see in here some XML from our clipboard. So let's go to XML editor online, which is a handy little utility. We're kind of breaking this out into something more readable. All right, so this is what, when you copy something in FileMaker and you paste it from, this is what that looks like on the clipboard. So I can actually manipulate this and put it back into FileMaker. And if I want to, I can use it to modify things. So if I wanted to maybe modify this message dynamically, I would be able to do that. If I needed to modify, anything in here, it's pretty easy to read. This is subject, this is message. So I didn't fill out a lot of things in here, but that gives you an idea of what this function is for. So let's see, what PDF. So there's some basic PDF things in here. You can you can merge two pages together. basically take two PDFs and combine them into a single file. It's more limited than what Scribe has, but again, Scribe costs money. So you might want to use this if it works for your name. The other powerful things that we normally use Base Elements for is sending HTML formatted email. And it's very useful for that because that's still not really, it's not technically supported by the FileMaker send mail script step. There are ways to do it now, but for the most part, this plugin makes it easy. The other thing we normally use this for is containers. So this has a function called BE export field contents. And if you look at FileMaker 19 export container, there's a script step called export field contents for FileMaker. It's how we take, images or files or PDFs or whatever we have stored in our container files, and we export that to the disk. But there's a big glaring incompatibility because it's not FileMaker server compatible. So none of my server scripts can take container contents and export it to the folder, which might be important for things like combining two PDF files together, or manipulating PDFs and filling them out, or emailing them as attachments to somebody. I might need to have that stuff on disk. So Base Elements has this function, BE export field contents, that allows FileMaker server to actually export container contents. So that's something that's super useful there. And like the rest of the stuff in here is, there's a lot of stuff in here. I'm not going to cover everything in all of these. But this does come with a good note. There are functions that will be deprecated and removed time to time from plugins because they're either built into FileMaker for so long now that nobody uses these functions anymore, or they've been replaced by different functions. So it's important to read the documentation for your plugins as you're developing them so that you know that, and set yourself a reminder that whenever you upgrade FileMaker, go back and check that documentation to make sure nothing has changed. So an example of that is Base64 encode and decode. So those functions have been built into FileMaker for a while now, and I can just go in here and do Base64 encode and pass it some data, and then I can take this and I can go Base64 decode, and I can decode that Base64 data to get back what I need. And Base64 isn't a secure way to send data, but Base64, what it allows you to do is it allows you to take images and small document files, convert them to Base64 so they can be sent as text, as like this text string, and then you can decode it on the other side. So it's kind of like a way to stick a file in an envelope and send it to somewhere else, because they might not support streaming a file. All right. Okay, let's move on to our next plugin, which is going to be MonkeyBread. So MonkeyBread is a plugin that this guy, Christian, who is based out of Germany, this is his job. His entire life's work is to build and create this plugin. And he ported this plugin to the Zojo platform as well. It doesn't have as many features, but he wanted to do that because at the time there were people were looking into Zojo as a platform as an alternative FileMaker. So it was familiarity. So there is a very, very long list of all of the things that this does. And we probably won't go through all of these. The versions also change on pretty much a monthly basis. So this is a plugin that you have to keep up to date if you use it. But I will show you, well, first off, I'm not even going to show you any of the plugin functions, because what really makes Monkey Bread stand apart from the rest is that it actually extends into the interface of FileMaker Pro as well. Not just, it's not just a set of functions, it's also got developer tools. So you'll start to see that right when you look at the configuration. Like there's a lot of stuff to configure in here. There's a lot of stuff that this plugin does. Also, you can register that if you're in here. But let's take, for instance, let's look at, well, I gotta say, this is my favorite feature. So let me just open up my last demo, even though I called this. This is probably the best feature that I've seen since like FileMaker 14 came out. And basically all it is autocomplete variables. So let's say I have a script and it has a lot of variables in it. It has, it has like my order ID, and it has my client ID, and it has my date, and it has, on and on, some other field. When I get in a really long script, and I'm just going to hold down the return key here. Now I have to remember what I was doing 30 seconds ago, 30 days ago, 3 years ago to remember my variable names. Well, not here necessarily. So this autocomplete box that shows up here is what's worth its weight in gold. Is basically when you open up a script for editing, Monkey Bread sits there and it reads through the script's XML and it finds all of those $ variable names you've created, and it puts them into this pop-up menu for you, so that it's actually extending the FileMaker interface, because this isn't a native function of FileMaker. If you don't have an MBS, you won't see this menu pop up. So this allows me to not have to remember that I need order ID here. So the thing that makes this like monumental is I'm using the trial version of Monkey Bread. I don't have my license key input on this computer. I actually have a license key for it, but it's on my iMac sitting over there about 3 feet. So I haven't transferred my license to this computer yet. But this developer tool and some of these other developer tools that are included are just included for free. So you don't need to get them. You'll see this no license message. The other thing it offers is like script searching. So if I search for some other field, you see how it highlights this line up here? That is one of its features. And it's not all perfect. It does cause some bugs. Like you'll see my line numbers 1 through 13 have disappeared over here. That's a known issue with Monkey Bread. Although all I have to do is kind of force it to redraw by like checking that row, and it comes back. And sometimes it can make some stuff look weird. Like sometimes you'll open this dialog and this will be halfway down the page or something like that. It messes up some of the spacing, but it also allows you to do stuff like zoom in, and you can see that really messes with the line numbers. So zoom out, equalize it back up. So those developer tools are in Monkey Bread, like without any license. But it also has a ton of functions as well. But you'll notice that when I go here, there's just one function, because in older versions of Monkey Bread, there were actually different functions for everything. And then he got to like 2000 functions and everybody complained that it was, all of their functions list was Monkey Bread functions and they couldn't find the rest. So what he did is he came up with a way to pass the function under a single function. So he has a single function that calls all of the functions in his database. So let's see what his dialog does. So there's like, you can just see that he's got just a ton of functions for this. Let's do dialog run. So you can see that his stuff is a little bit more complicated because it's not all being passed into one function. So basically what we're doing is we're taking a bunch of different steps to create a dialog. And then at the end of that, we're using dialog run to do that. And then so here's another good thing is he normally has example databases as part of the documentation that covers all of this. So I can just download this example, open it up. Close out this other stuff. So he has an example. And those examples will have just scripts that you can copy and paste straight out of there into your own solution. So all of his plugin subcategories, they all have this level of documentation. So if I go back to like the PDF functions here, uses PDF kit, I'll scroll down to the bottom and I'll see example databases. And so he's got an example how to compress a PDF, how to encrypt a PDF, merge PDF, stick pictures in a PDF, all that good stuff. So that, oops, I didn't need to actually quit out of there. So all of that stuff makes that plugin very valuable. And it's not an expensive plugin. It's, I think, $300. No, $149 for a single user. Or you can get group licenses, or you can get a server license or a site license so everybody in your organization can use it. And that also, I believe, includes all of your updates for at least a year. So for the amount of power that this gives you, it's a pretty reasonable cost. All right, let's see, we're running out of time here. Just two more I want to cover, and then we'll kind of chat about any questions. So let's say that you wanted to make your own plugins. This next plugin is a plugin that lets you make plugins. So it's kind of a little bit confusing. There are some limitations though, and we'll talk about that. So this is 360works Script Master. And Script Master is a plugin that essentially allows you to execute Java scripts, not JavaScript, Java scripts. Specifically Groovy, which is just a flavor of Java. So if you've ever written Java before, this will be all familiar to you. If you haven't written Java before, don't worry about it. This is mostly just an example. But if I wanted to solve some issues that can be solved with Java, then I could make my own plugin here. And there's this plugin generation part. But basically what you do here is this FileMaker file has all of the different scripts that run, and you can check off what you want. And then when you go and generate the plugin, it will actually tell you, it'll allow you to like kind of just generate that plugin. And then that plugin will only have the features or the scripts that you need in it, and they'll execute as plugin functions. So this is kind of like an easy way to do that. So this is what the interface looks like here. Obviously, like it's all Java, so I'm not going to really cover what this code does, but basically it allows you to kind of give it a name. It allows you to give it parameters that are going to be the function parameters. And then it's got an example here. Now I don't have library user pictures animal dragonfly here, so it gave me a warning message. But it has its own testing result in here too. So some of the things that I've used this for has been image processing before, rotating images, watermarking images. Watermarking is something we've used this actually a couple times for people. We had a client who was selling computer parts on eBay, and his eBay listings, he had 20,000 listings on eBay at any time for small computer parts. So he needed a way that he could go through 20,000 images at a time and add his watermark automatically to the bottom right-hand corner of each image. So this was the plugin we chose to do that, because we were able to just slightly modify this script here for what we needed it to do. So again, it's not all connected here. I'm just kind of going over this as a review of what this does. So if you do want to make your own plugin and compile it, you can do that here. And it comes with 85 or so test examples of things that you can do. Play music, Mac only. And some of the stuff only works. I wonder if that works here. Yep. Yeah, so some of the stuff does work out of their demo. All right, so that's Scriptmaster. Scriptmaster is free, but if you want to actually like resell the plugins that you create or take away the 360works branding, you can actually buy the upgraded version of that, which is also pretty reasonable. Of course, you also need to have somebody that writes Java for you, so it might take a while for you to get what you need. All right, so we've gone over that. Let's go through 2for-U Toolbox. So let me see if I've got Toolbox examples. Okay, this last one is made by 2for-U Software. There it is. 2for-U Software is based out of Prague in Czech Republic. These guys are some really good guys that we, if you remember back to my NFC tag presentation where I had that giant cow scanning wand, 2for-U was one of the companies that we were working with to try to get a native plugin for FileMaker that would have allowed us to use that scanner. Unfortunately, there was this incident that occurred worldwide a couple of years ago that kind of put a bookmark in that. So we never got around to finishing that with them. But they have a number of other plugins listed here under tools. One of their tools are also cool, which is what I like about them. They don't just make plugins, they also make tools. FM Bench is their big tool, which basically this is a tool for your FileMaker file that lets you kind of have a way to kind of debug the performance in your file to tell you where your file might be slowing down, where you have bottlenecks in your file. So it creates some pretty detailed reports if you have files that are very slow to fix. So highly recommend them for that. FM Restore is also something that we've used. It's a wrapper for the data API that lets you write really simple PHP code or really simple JavaScript code. But we are here for Toolbox, which is a developer utility. So like Bbox that I mentioned before, it allows you to execute some system shell scripts. It allows you to do execute SQL. And this is execute SQL. This is allowing you to use SQL syntax to perform FileMaker functions. So if I want to create a new record using a function, I can do that with this SQL. Regular expressions, that's kind of what we're going to probably do as an example. And we'll do pattern count as an example. So here's their example, really simple. So regular expressions are, I guess the best way to say it probably like the hieroglyphics of programming, like unless you have a degree in ancient Egyptian studies from the University of Cairo, you're probably can't type out your own regular expressions just by memory, but they are very, very important for programmers to know, for the sake of being able to identify patterns. So right here, we're doing pattern matching in here. And you can see here that we have patterns to be counted. We have US telephone numbers, and that's this pattern here. So basically, it might be actually easier to do hours or devolving hours here. So this is looking for 2 characters of hours. Yeah, but all I can say is that from this pattern result, it matches 2 things. It finds this date field up here and this date field. Let's say that I added, oops, let me add a bunch more of these. And now I want to search for date again. Now I've got 9 occurrences of that. So this lets us do things like validate email addresses for real. Not just check that there's an @ symbol, but actually check the second half of it to make sure it's formatted as a domain and make sure it doesn't have any illegal characters. It lets us very quickly go through, like, you might get a bunch of data that somebody submitted in a form, like OCR data. So if you had somebody scan an entire textbook's worth of data, and now you have to go through that textbook and find all the phone numbers in that textbook. You would do that with regular expressions because it would be able to go through all of the contents of the text and identify the patterns of where a phone number occurs. So it's really good at extracting, and it's really high level stuff. But this plugin makes it a lot easier because basically all you need to know is what pattern am I searching for, and this can find it for you. So the other one is like a substitute. So in this one, this allows us to substitute out specific data in here. So you can see this is 2395, which is a European date for March 20th, 1995. And they want to substitute it with, 12/10/2008. So if I substitute it, you'll see that not only is it in there, but it's also colored as well. So I can see exactly where it was being substituted throughout here. All right. So the other toolbox, let's do, does it have the SQL one? Print management, does this do what I think it does? Yeah, printer management. This is another common plugin that's there's a number of different plugins for, but it allows you to, this one gets a list of all of your printers and it allows you to set a default printer. So I only have one printer here, but if I actually go under system preferences and look for printers, you'll see that this is actually that printer that's there. So if I want to programmatically check to make sure that a user on my computer has a user using FileMaker has a specific printer installed and named properly, this is a plugin that would be capable of doing that. HTML conversions, man, there's so much that this stuff does. Basically, this is just converting from a rich text format over here into what you see over there. So if I say, this is our test. You can see that that amount pops up in my HTML over here. So this is actually getting HTML text, which then I can feed into a website if I wanted to feed that data into a website. So this is also important to know because I know somebody mentioned WebDirect before. rich text formatting, which is this style of formatting, which if I put this bar up, this formatting here with these colors and text sizes, WebDirect, it's still not compatible. So if I looked at this on a WebDirect system, I wouldn't see any of this rich text formatting. So if I needed to support rich text formatting, I could use a web viewer and I could display the contents as HTML in that web viewer. So that's a way to kind of get around that. All right, well, we have taken up pretty much the whole time, and you've all been gracious in letting me ramble on around about what my favorite plugins are. One last note of if you're interested in looking at more plugins, the marketplace is usually a good place to go. Claris's marketplace has plugins. I don't think they call them, I think they call them extensions here. No, extensions is just, yeah, let me see if I can find something from like Troy in here. All right. So yeah, I guess they are under extensions, but you can read about different plugins here, different integrations and everything. So I would go to it's just marketplace.claris.com. You can read up on a lot of these. Most of the ones on there are currently maintained, so you don't have to worry about if it's supported or not. If you run across a plugin and you go here and you search for it and it's not here, that might be a warning sign that you might not want to use it. All right. So any other questions from anybody? Any other thoughts or comments? All right, everyone, thank you for coming and hanging out today. I will give you a minute back of your time and we will see you next month. We'll come up with an interesting topic for you. Hopefully we can get you all back. All right, I'll talk later. Thanks.